Do you feel a shiver up your spine from fear? Yes, it's another story from the Nightshade diary. You know what that means. Check under the bed and make sure no one or nothing is there. Is the closet door securely shut? Then leave your disbelief behind. Amp up your imagination and hang on tight for another ride into terror and mystery. And like all good horror stories, just imagine it's a dark and stormy night. And remember, screaming like a little girl is permitted. The Dream Snake by Robert E. Howard. The night was strangely still as we sat upon the wide veranda, gazing out over the broad, shadowy lawns. The silence of the hour entered our spirits, and for a long while no one spoke. Then far across the dim mountains that fringed the eastern skyline, a faint haze began to glow, and presently a great golden moon came up, making a ghostly radiance over the land and etching boldly the dark clumps of shadows that were trees. A light breeze came whispering out of the east, and the unmowed grass swayed before it in long, sinuous waves, dimly visible in the moonlight. And from among the group upon the veranda there came a swift gasp, a sharp intake of breath that caused us all to turn and gaze. Faming was leaning forward, clutching the arms of his chair, his face strange and pallid in the spectral light, a thin trickle of blood seeping from the lip in which he had set his teeth. Amazed, we looked at him, and suddenly he jerked about with a short, snarling laugh. "There's no need of gawking at me like a flock of sheep," he said irritably, and stopped short. We sat bewildered, scarcely knowing what sort of reply to make, and suddenly he burst out again. "Now I guess I'd better tell the whole thing, or you'll be going off and putting me down as a lunatic. Don't interrupt me, any of you. I want to get this thing off my mind. You all know that I'm not a very imaginative man, but there's a thing, purely a figment of imagination, that has haunted me since babyhood. A dream." He fairly cringed back in his chair as he muttered, "A dream! And God, what a dream! The first time? No, I can't remember the first time I ever dreamed it. I've been dreaming that hellish thing ever since I can remember. Now, it's this way. There is a sort of bungalow set upon a hill in the midst of wide grasslands, not unlike this estate, but this scene is in Africa, and I am living there with a sort of servant, a Hindu. Just why I'm there is never clear in my waking mind, though I am aware of the reason in my dreams. As a man of a dream, I remember my past life, a life which in no way corresponds with my waking life, but when I am awake, my subconscious mind fails to transmit these impressions. However, I think that I am a fugitive from justice, and the Hindu is also a fugitive. How the bungalow came to be there I can never remember, nor do I know in what part of Africa it is, though all these things are known to my dream self. But the bungalow is a small one, of a very few rooms, and is situated upon the top of the hill, as I said. There are no other hills about, and the grasslands stretch to the horizon in every direction, knee-high in some places, waist-high in others. Now the dream always opens as I am coming up the hill, just as the sun is beginning to set. I am carrying a broken rifle, and I have been on a hunting trip. How the rifle was broken, and the full details of the trip, I clearly remember dreaming, but never upon waking. It is just as if a curtain were suddenly raised and the drama began, or just as if I was suddenly transferred to another man's body and life, remembering past years of that life and not cognizant of any other existence. And that is the hellish part of it. As you know, most of us dreaming are, at the back of our consciousness, aware that we are dreaming. No matter how horrible the dream may become, we know that it is a dream, and thus insanity or possible death is staved off. But in this particular dream, there is no such knowledge. I tell you, it is so vivid, so complete in every detail, that I wonder sometimes if this is not my real existence, and this is a dream. But no, for then I should have been dead years ago. As I was saying, I come up the hill, and the first thing I am cognizant of that is out of the ordinary is a sort of track leading up the hill in an irregular way. That is, the grass is mashed down, as if something heavy had been dragged over it. But I pay no special attention to it, for I am thinking with some irritation that the broken rifle I carry is my only arm, and that now I must forego hunting until I can send for another. You see, I remember thoughts and impressions of the dream itself, of the occurrences of the dream. It is the memories that the dream I has, of that other dream existence that I cannot remember. So I come up the hill and into the bungalow. The doors are open and the Hindu is not there, but the main room is in confusion. Chairs are broke, a table overturned. The Hindu's dagger is lying upon the floor, but there is no blood anywhere. Now, in my dreams, I never remember the other dreams, as sometimes one does. Always, it is the first dream, the first time. I always experience the same sensations in my dreams with as vivid a force as the first time I ever dreamed. So, I'm not able to understand this. The Hindu is gone, but thus I ruminate standing in the center of the disordered room. What did away with him? Had it been a raiding party of villagers? They would have looted the bungalow and probably burned it. Had it been a lion, the place would have been smeared with blood. Then suddenly I remember the track I saw going up the hill, and a cold hand touches my spine. For instantly the whole thing is clear. The thing that came up from the grasslands and wrought havoc in the little bungalow could be naught else except a giant serpent. And as I think of the size of the spoor, cold sweat beats my forehead, and the broken rifle shakes in my hand. Then I rush to the door in a wild panic, my only thought to make a dash for the coast. But the sun has set, and dusk is stealing across the grasslands. And out there somewhere, lurking in the tall grass, is that grisly thing, that horror. God! The ejaculation broke from his lips with such feeling that all of us started, not realizing the tension we had reached. There was a second's silence, and he continued. So, I bolt the doors and windows, light the lamp I have, and take my stand in the middle of the room. And I stand like a statue, waiting, listening. After a while the moon comes up, and her haggard light drifts through the windows, and I stand still in the center of the room. The night is very still, something like this night. The breeze occasionally whispers through the grass, and each time I start and clench my hands until the nails bite into the flesh, and the blood trickles down my wrists. And I stand there and wait and listen, but it does not come that night. The sentence came suddenly and explosively. An involuntary gasp came from the rest, a relaxing of tension. I am determined, if I live the night through, to start for the coast early the next morning, taking my chances out there in the grim grasslands with it. But with morning I dare not. I do not know in which direction the monster went, and I dare not risk coming upon him in the open, unarmed as I am. So, as in a maze, I remain at the bungalow, and ever my eyes turn toward the sun, lurching relentlessly down the sky toward the horizon. Oh God, if I could but halt the sun in the sky. The man was in the clutch of some terrific power. His words fairly leaped at us. Then the sun rocks down the sky, and the long gray shadows come stalking across the grasslands. Dizzy with fear, I have bolted the doors and windows and lighted the lamp long before the last faint glow of twilight fades. The light from the window may attract the monster, but I dare not stay in the dark, and again I take my stand in the center of the room, waiting. There was a shuddersome halt, then he continued barely above a whisper, moistening his lips. There is no knowing how long I stand there. Time has ceased to be, and each second is an eon. Each minute is an eternity, stretching into endless eternities. Then God. But what is that? He leaned forward, the moonlight etching his face into such a mask of horrified listening that each of us shivered and flung a hasty glance over our shoulders. Not the night breeze this time, he whispered. Something makes the grasses swish, swish, as if a great, long, pliant weight were being dragged through them. Above the bungalow, it swishes and then ceases in front of the door. Then the hinges creak, creak. The door begins to bulge inward, a small bit, then some more. The man's arms were held in front of him as if braced strongly against something, and his breath came in quick gasps. And I know I should lean against the door and hold it shut, but I do not. I cannot move. I stand there like a sheep waiting to be slaughtered, but the door holds. Again that sigh, expressive of pent-up feelings. He drew a shaky hand across his brow. And all night I stand in the center of that room as motionless as an image, except to turn slowly as a swish-swish of the grass marks the fiend's course about the house. Ever I keep my eyes in the direction of that soft, sinister sound. Sometimes it ceases for an instant or for several minutes, and then I stand scarcely breathing, for a horrible obsession has it that the serpent has in some way made entrance into the bungalow, and I start and whirl this way and that, frightfully fearful of making a noise, though I know not why, but ever with a feeling that the thing is at my back. Then the sounds commence again, and I freeze motionless. Now, here is the only time that my consciousness, which guides my waking hours, ever in any way pierces the veil of dreams. I am, in the dream, in no way conscious that it is a dream, but in a detached sort of way my other mind recognizes certain facts and passes them on to my sleeping, shall I say, ego? That is to say, my personality is for an instant truly dual and separate to an extent as the right and left arms are separate, while making up parts in the same entity. My dreaming mind has no cognizance of my higher mind. For the time being, the other mind is subordinated, and the subconscious mind is in full control, to such an extent that it does not even recognize the existence of the other. But the conscious mind, now sleeping, is cognizant of dim thought waves emanating from the dream mind. I know that I have not made this entirely clear, but the fact remains that I know that my mind, conscious and subconscious, is near to ruin. My obsession of fear, as I stand there in my dream, is that the serpent will raise itself and peer into the window at me, and I know in my dream that if this occurs, I shall go insane. And so vivid is the impression imparted to my conscious, now sleeping mind that the thought waves stir the dim seas of sleep, and somehow I can feel my sanity rocking as my sanity rocks in my dream. Back and forth it totters and sways until the motion takes on a physical aspect, and I, in my dream, am swaying from side to side. Not always is the sensation the same, but I tell you, if that horror ever raises its terrible shape and leers at me, if I ever see the fearful thing in my dream, I shall become stark, wild, insane. There was a restless movement among the rest. God, but what a prospect, he muttered. To be insane and forever dreaming that same dream night and day. But there I stand, and centuries go by. But at last a dim gray light begins to steal through the windows. The swishing dies away in the distance, and presently a red, haggard sun climbs the eastern sky. Then I turn about and gaze into a mirror. My hair has become perfectly white. I stagger to the door and fling it wide. There is nothing in sight but a wide track leading down the hill through the grasslands in the opposite direction from that which I would take toward the coast. And with a shriek of maniacal laughter I dash down the hill and race across the grasslands. I race until I drop from exhaustion, then I lie until I can stagger up and go on. All day I keep this up, with superhuman effort spurred on by the horror behind me. And ever as I hurl myself forward on weakening legs, ever as I lie gasping for breath, I watch the sun with a terrible eagerness. How swiftly the sun travels when a man races it for life. A losing race it is, as I know when I watch the sun sinking toward the skyline, and the hills which I had hoped to gain ere sundown seemingly as far away as ever. His voice was lowered, and instinctively we leaned toward him. He was gripping the chair arms, and the blood was seeping from his lips. Then the sun sets, and the shadows come, and I stagger on, and fall and rise, and reel on again. And I laugh, laugh, laugh. Then I cease, for the moon comes up, and throws the grasslands in ghost and silver relief. The light is white across the land, though the moon itself is like blood. And I look back the way I have come, and far back. All of us lean further toward him, our hair prickle. His voice came like a ghostly whisper. Far back, I see the grass waving. There is no breeze, but the tall grass parts and sways in the moonlight, in a narrow, sinuous line far away, but nearing every instant. His voice died away. Somebody broke the ensuing stillness. And then? Then I awake. Never yet have I seen the foul monster, but that is the dream that haunts me, and from which I have awakened in my childhood screaming, in my manhood in cold sweat. At irregular intervals I dream it, and each time lately, he hesitated, then went on. Each time lately the thing has been getting closer, closer. The waving of the grass marks his progress, and he nears me with each dream, and then, when he reaches me, then... He stopped short, then without a word rose abruptly and entered the house. The rest of us sat silent for a while, then followed him, for it was late. How long I slept I do not know, but I woke suddenly with the impression that somewhere in the house someone had laughed, long, loud, and hideously, as a maniac laughs. Starting up, wondering if I had been dreaming, I rushed from my room, just as a truly horrible shriek echoed through the house. The place was now alive, with other people who had been awakened, and all of us rushed to Faming's room, whence the sound had seemed to come. He lay dead upon the floor, where it seemed he had fallen in some terrific struggle. There was no mark upon him, but his face was terribly distorted, as the face of a man who had been crushed by some superhuman force, such as some gigantic snake. The White Scar by Nellie Cravey Gillmore. Am I crazy? I do not think so, but I do not know. Anyhow, I am in an asylum for the hopelessly insane. I was sent here a long time ago, weeks or months or years. I cannot say. Time has lost its meaning for me as far as calendars are concerned. The everlasting days, the intolerable nights are all merged into chaos. Out of it but one thought, one hope comes clear, the longing for death. Only dimly do I recall my last experience among sane men, when I was on trial for the murder of Buck Gordon, a man whom I had never known, had never even seen until the moment my hands closed about his throat. I am glad I killed him. Unutterably glad. The one joy of my wretched existence is the memory of those bulging bloodshot eyes, that rasping death gurgle as the breath went out of Gordon's body. I was stunned by the verdict, the jury brought in, by the judge's words that followed it. I had hoped and prayed for the chair. My mission had been accomplished, and I was prepared to face my Creator. I shall never forget the sick desolation that swept over me when I learned that I was not to die after all, and so I exist on and on, a thing, a living dead creature among scores of other living dead creatures, yet certain in my heart that I am absolutely sane. You, who may read this, shall decide. This is my story. At 28, I married Dorothy Wayne. I'd adored her for years. Ours was an ideal union. We were not only lovers, we were friends, pals. I suppose our happiness was almost too perfect to last in a hard, ruthless world. We shall find it again in heaven. Nothing can cheat me of this belief. Just a year after our wedding day, a telegram announcing the serious illness of my wife's mother down in Louisiana came to me. I dreaded to convey these tidings to Dorothy in her frail condition, but I had no right to withhold such information, and so I hurried home at once with the message. She was very composed, very brave, but equally determined in her purpose to start south at once. It was impossible for me to accompany her, owing to important deals pending, and with a heavy heart I drove her to the station and kissed her goodbye, little dreaming that I was never to see her again. For the first few weeks Dorothy wrote daily the bright, loving letters that were so much a part of her happy, radiant self. Then suddenly the letters ceased. Days passed. She had written that her mother was improving, that she would be able to start for home soon, and would advise me by wire. Yet a week went by and no wire came. Restless at first, I grew anxious, and finally downright alarmed. Unable to bear the suspense, but trying to laugh at my own fears, I dispatched the message myself to the Louisiana address. An answer came late in the afternoon of the same day, announcing that Dorothy had left Gretna for New York almost a week before. I was like a wild man. What was the meaning of it all? Where was she? What had happened? I threw down everything and took the first train south. Investigations were futile. Mrs. Wayne had died suddenly while I was en route to Gretna, and a daughter with whom she was making her home, Dorothy's elder sister, could tell me only that my wife had called a taxi on Tuesday night and started for the station. There was no clue to identify the driver, and a thorough probing failed to reveal anything on which to work. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed her up, and the whole world was a sphinx. The wonder to me now is that in those first few days I did not go quite mad, yet I didn't. Perhaps it was the desperate necessity for clear thought, for action, that steadied my brain and my nerves. Hope buoyed me up in the beginning, but as the mystery became denser, blanker, and more baffling, I saw myself changing into the pitiful wreck of what I once had been. I roved from place to place, unshaven, unkempt, with only one purpose in life, to find my wife, alive or dead. I sacrificed my entire business interest for what cash I could recover to keep me fed and clothed while I pursued my desperate quest. Police, detectives had exhausted their ingenuity and dismissed the case, but every minute, every day, every year, as long as I breathed, my life would be devoted to digging out the truth and to revenge. I was certain she had been murdered, for by no mere accident could such a complete disappearance have come to pass, and no evil or treacherous design could have lurked in the heart of the woman I loved, and who loved me. Of that I was even surer. Not once nor twice, but hundreds and hundreds of times I went over the same ground, convinced that sooner or later some unguarded word or circumstance would betray some vague hint of a clue. Apparently, the world had wondered 9 days and then forgotten the tragedy of my poor little Dorothy's strange disappearance. But as time wore on, the poignancy, the ghastliness, grew more and more acute in my own heart. At 35, I was an old man. My hair had turned snow white, my shoulders sagged, my hands were palsied, my voice was hollow and cracked, but inside were blazing still those deathless, consuming fires that seemed to gather fresh force with every passing day. I began to be shunned by fastidious passerbys, regarded with suspicion by all with whom I came in contact, or pitied by the few who were perhaps kinder of heart. I was now merely a vagabond, caring nothing for snubs or slights, every conscious feeling merged into the one imperishable purpose for which I lived. Toward the end of the 7th summer of my wanderings, I found myself back once more on familiar Louisiana soil. I traveled all the way from Memphis along the river banks, begging my way now, for my last hoarded funds were gone, and there was little work I could find or do. Weary and footsore from a whole day's uninterrupted trudge, with only a meal of wild grapes for sustenance, I felt my knees tremble and sink beneath my frail weight. I was in the heart of a wilderness. Following the torrid day, a lashing rain had set in, and a little while came night, impenetrable as ink. A quarter-hour's blind search brought me drenched and shivering to an old abandoned tumble-down shack close to the edge of the swirling Mississippi. I forced one of the rickety windows, and clambering inside, I dropped helpless to the floor. I must have lain unconscious for a long time, for the next thing I knew, a clock somewhere was booming midnight. The sound seemed to come from a distance, and it was oddly familiar. Then I remembered. It was the town bell at Gretna, and this was an old-time shrimper's haunt, deserted now for more modern equipment. My skin was parched, and it burned like flame. My eyes seemed to be coals of fire dancing about in my head. My tongue was hot, thick, swollen, yet icy rigors shook me convulsively. I was ablaze with fever. I wondered dimly if this were to be the end of my pilgrimage, a drowsy lethargy and blindness. I was roused from my coma by a woman's shrill, terrified scream. The scream was followed immediately by a succession of short, choking, gurgling sounds, then a man's fiendish, exultant laugh, almost a snarl in gloating, savage words. Mine at last, my pretty Dot. Scorn me, did you, for the fine New Yorker who stole you from me? I promised you I'd pay. Remember? Stop that squealing, damn you. The river sharks are playing round tonight. They'll manage, so he'll not get you again. And in an hour's time, I'll be hauling passengers just the same as usual. I tried to move. I was paralyzed. I attempted to cry out, but no sound left my stiff lips. And then, of a sudden, before I could free my limbs from that deadly atrophy, even before thought might be framed, there came more cries, even more terrible than those that had gone before, frightened, almost unrecognizable, but unmistakably belonging to her. Great God, Dorothy, my wife, murdered before my very eyes, and I helpless, moveless, dumb. There was a sickening bump of a body against the floor, and a man's maniacal laughter. Then suddenly the heavens parted, in a lurid flash, and I saw not the woman's face, nor the man's, but a pair of huge, hairy arms folded triumphantly over a bulging naked and equally hairy chest. On the left forearm was a large jagged scar in the shape of a cross, clearly visible against the hirsute blackness of the rest of the limb. A simultaneous crash of thunder shook the battered old structure and split it like an eggshell. I sat up, cold with perspiration, straining my eyes through the blackness, straining my ears in a tense horror of expectancy. But all I could see now was the dense blackness of the night, and all I could hear was the weird shrieking of the wind in the trees. My delirium had passed, but still, rigid in the grip of that horrible nightmare, I huddled in a corner of the wreck shanty and waited for dawn. Eternities passed. Then slowly, after the storm, a soft pink glow in the east heralded daylight. It was little more than an hour's walk to the outskirts of Gretna, but horror lent speed to my trembling limbs, and despite my physical weakness, I made it in much less time. I needed food sorely. If I could not earn it or beg it, then I should have to steal it. Suddenly, I came upon a group of laborers gathered about a corner grocery, waiting for the factory whistle to summon them to work. I approached timidly. Perhaps in the crowd someone would be kind enough to give me the price of a meal. Hey, old-timer, kinder need a shave, don't you? Their jeers affected me little. I replied as kind as I could. Perhaps, but right now I need something else more. I'm hungry. I have had no food for 48 hours. A pleasant-faced young fellow instantly produced his dinner pail. Help yourself, mister. You're welcome to it all. After I had eaten, I sat down among them to rest. Looks like you've had a night of it, Colonel. Which way you come? Asked one of the men. I spent the night at an old shack down by the riverside. About 3 miles away, I reckon. Instantly, 8 pairs of bulging eyes were riveted on me. Good Lord, man. You ain't telling us you stayed all night at the haunted house, are you? Why do you call it that? I asked, recalling with a shiver my frightful nightmare. Well, the speaker went on, all the folks who used to live in that direction have moved away. Ain't a soul stayed near it since that night when Miss Polly Sims told she heard a woman screaming, years ago. Shut up, Bill. Polly Sims was an old fool. You ain't getting superstitious, are you? I put my hand to my head. A woman screaming? There was something queer, my thoughts muddled. Then the factory whistle sounded, and there was a scuffling to be off. I too rose, not knowing what else to do. One of the men, a big burly ruffian, turned to me with a leer. Come on down and we'll get you a job as water boy, old top. Guffawing at his own wit, the speaker flourished a brawny arm and finished his laugh with a grin of derision. For a second I stood petrified, the blood freezing about my heart. Come along, Buck. Ain't you got no sense? Let the gentleman be. Before Buck Gordon could speak, could move, I was upon him with the savage ferocity and strength of a wild beast, notwithstanding my weakened and broken condition. My hands were on his throat. My claw-like fingers sank into the thick red flesh. For on that bare and hairy arm, clearly visible against the hirsute blackness, was a jagged white scar in the shape of a cross. Damn you! Damn you! I've got you at last. Thank God. Dorothy Wayne is avenged. Buck Gordon was quite dead, When they finally loosened my fingers from his throat, he lay in an inert heap on the sun-seared grass, his tongue hanging in a purple lump from the swollen lips. His terror-glazed eyes popped from their sockets. For one tense, triumphant, never-to-be-forgotten second, I stood there looking down at my handiwork. For the first time in long years, I knew relief and joy. I cared very little what happened now, for my mission was accomplished. Then the world swam around. Everything went black, and my knees gave under me. Rough hands laid hold of me, and utter blankness. Those endless days in my narrow prison cell, waiting, hoping, praying for the trial and the sentence that would bring death and reunion with my beloved, my cruelly murdered little Dorothy waiting for me, up there. Paranoia, they call it. And instead of the longed-for chair, to set me free, I must spend the remainder of my wretched days in a padded cell. How many of them have come and gone? I do not know. How many are still to come and go? Who shall say? I'm writing this purely as an outlet to feelings that sooner or later must drive me mad if I hold them in any longer. If my poor narrative, my pitiful story, should ever find its way into print, it may be there is someone who will understand. Am I crazy? I do not think so, but I do not know.